Welcome to the Sandersonian Institute of Cosmere Studies, where there's always another secret.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 1 of the Sandersonian Institute of Cosmere Studies, a podcast dedicated to Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere novels. I am Bill, and I'm here with my co-hosts Jordan and Amy. Welcome, guys, and let's get things started.
Okay.
So first things first, a few introductions. As I said, I'm Bill. Sometimes I go by Baggins. And all three of us are really big fans of the Cosmere. We were introduced several years ago, and we just really enjoy it. Guys, feel free to introduce yourselves.
I guess I'll go next. I'm Amy. I also can go by Matsugi, which means pine tree in Japanese, if you're curious. And
I actually did not know that.
I didn't.
Yeah, I got it from my Japanese class. They're like, pick a name because your last name doesn't work. So I was like, I guess I'll go for that one. So there we go.
All right.
I'm Jordan, go by Splice. Some people know me from my XCOM streaming, not very many though. And I'm looking forward to this. This is something that me and Bill came up with couple of months ago.
We've had this in the works for a little while now, so
yeah.
And we've been putting a lot of effort into it. We're excited to get things going. So, yeah. So we did start talking about this a few months ago. Why are we doing this? What's the point of creating this podcast? Why are we here?
Well, for one, you and I waste too much air talking about Brandon without making other people listen to us. So.
We're fascinating.
We are. We're amazing conversationalists as far as I'm concerned, and more people need to listen to us, frankly.
Yep.
This world is a mess, and I just need to rule it.
Yeah, essentially, we're basically huge fans of Brandon Sanderson who dove a little bit too deep down the rabbit hole. And we've been shuffling around. We've been coming up with some weird theories. We've been reading. We've been chatting. We've been just gushing about these books, and we want to know a little bit more. So yeah. So for the format of these podcasts, what we're planning to do, at least starting at the beginning, is we're going to focus a little bit on each book, sort of give not just a summary, but we're going to dive into it, talk about some of the things that interest us from it, some of the things, how they play into the actual Kazmir, which is a term we'll go into in a little bit, and figure out exactly what the bigger story Brandon is trying to tell. We're going to be looking at the books in order, mainly because Brandon's a storyteller. There's a reason he reveals certain things at certain times. And so the main plan, we'll probably deviate from it a little bit when the situation allows. For example, if there are different series aspects that we want to pull in. Each week we're going to be talking about those specific books in the series, and we're going to try to avoid spoilers from other books in the series. If we do start delving into that, we'll try and give a warning.
If you're watching live, just know that you're sitting on a live hand grenade at all times.
Absolutely, and if you're listening to the audio version, we'll try and put in a few warnings and even say, okay, we're going to talk about this for a while, and then we'll give you a cue for when you can come in and it's safe. So we're going to try and avoid spoilers where we can, but we're talking about these books and we're diving in pretty deep. So just know there's a good chance there will be spoilers ahead. So
spoilers and Balrogs when you go too deep.
Spoilers.
So starting off, we're just, how did we each of us, what are the important aspects of Brandon Sanderson's work is just there's something different about the way he writes, and each of us sort of discovered him in our own way. So, and we've had discussions amongst each other about, this is what I like about him, this is how I came about him. But, how did each of you learn about Brandon Sanderson? Jordan, you want to start us off?
Well, some hero that I lived with told me I should start listening to him. His name was Bill, and he is above me, both in literal terms, as I live in a basement, and in orientation on the overlay. It's I was on the lowest level, not out of anything else other than I do live in a basement. And I give him money once a month, just for the sheer honor of living in the presence of his house. And he kept telling me I should read this Brandon guy, but I actually have I have a pretty big aversion, for the most part, to reading fantasy. It takes a lot to get me started. And it's all...
That's an understatement.
Yeah, it's all Tolkien's fault. I had to read The Hobbit when I was younger, did not click with me, and thus all fantasy was forever.
I don't get that. I'm Baggins.
I know. Well, I didn't... It's okay. I didn't have to read you. I had to read a book.
Try to.
And so, my degree's in physics, and so, smartly, Bill told me about Mistborn, knew that I'd click with that better, and explained, for example, when they eat the metal and they push on it, if it weighs more than them, instead of it flying, they fly. And I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Actually thought it through.
Well, and what happened is, I remember as I was reading, I was like, so Jordan studied physics in college, and I remember as I was reading, thinking, okay, there's a lot of physics and scientific basis in this, and so I just sort of pushed it. I said, Jordan, you need to take a look at this one. I think you'll really like it. Okay, yeah. That was accidental.
Yes, he pushed it to try and pull me in, and wow. I'm just going to pat myself on the back here real quick, and... No, and so and then another friend of ours who we're living with, he started reading it as well, and so it was one of those, two people I know and like enjoy this, I can start, and so I took Mistborn's 1 and 2 over a Christmas break home, finished both, and I still had time, and I'm like, crap, I want to know what happens now, and so then I had to go buy my own copy of the third book, like a schlub. And read that, and so I finished the entire trilogy in the span of, it was about 1 month. I read all 3, and I don't normally do that with books. So at that, and then after that, he's like, so that beggar Kelsier was talking to, that's a guy named Hoid, and I'm like, what's a Hoid?
What is a Hoid?
And down the hole,
and
which
then,
we'll also go into,
and then it's just down the hole that. No, these are all just one small piece of a very large puzzle. What about you, Amy?
Yeah.
So, there's a thing where you get pregnant and you lose brain cells. I'm going to blame partially on that. And the fact that it's been...
I cannot understand this directly, but I'll...
Yeah, it's a scientific thing that they've proven that you actually lose brain cells, although it's terrible that way. But I know I was introduced to Elantris first, and... It was either through a roommate. I had 5 roommates, 3 or 4 of which were big readers, or it was through my husband, who was my fiance at the time. And I read quite a bit of fantasy, but it's always nice to read fantasy where the women aren't like, "Oh, you must save me," or like
the fainting couch.
Pretend to be hardcore, but actually aren't, or just.
Or just a man with boobs.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that's a little weird, too.
Yeah.
So, I liked that, and I liked the cool magic aspect, and I love playing scenes out in my head, and, imagining them doing this and that. And I was never super big into science, but the fight scenes in Mistborn sounded really, really cool.
Got it.
Just imagining them in my head.
Oh, yeah.
And I've always had a thing for feisty female characters, and Din definitely fits that. And she's short, and I'm kind of short, so I'm
Brandon
like,
seems to like those too. So
yeah, it's nice, it's fun.
Yeah. So for me, I remember what happened. I just kept hearing all these people talking about this book, Mistborn. I was like, it was this brand new book, and everybody's talking about how amazing it is. And I hadn't really thought about it, but I heard the author's name, and I also heard the name Elantris a few times. And I was walking along out. This is at college. We actually all went to the same university that Brandon Sanderson graduated from, and so. But I was walking in. The bookstore had an outdoor sale, and I walked in and saw this book, and I said, "I keep hearing about it. I'll check it out. It's a hardback copy for $5. This is an investment I'm going to make." So I grabbed it, and I remember I was like a counselor at this youth camp. And
this was during that time?
This was during that time, what you call the dark time.
The dark time was full of a lot.
But after the kids fell asleep, I had to, stay up and make sure none of them snuck out for a little while. And so I sat down in the hallway. I pulled out this book, started reading. And 3 days later, I was finished.
Well, now I know why you were always so tired. I thought it was the teenagers.
That was 1 week. The other 4 weeks were absolutely the teenager.
Look, a Brandon Avalanche takes it out of a person, so...
Okay, so, but yeah, it's the interesting thing, though, is with Mistborn, I think I tried reading Mistborn before Elantris, and it took me 3 tries to get through the introduction for whatever reason. It's not a boring introduction, it just didn't grab me right, and I didn't know who this Kazmir guy was. I remember I got to the point where it said Kazmir burned 10. I was like, what the heck does this mean? But finally the third time I was just like, I'm going to read this. I keep hearing good things, and holy cow. It was just one heck of a ride from there. So yeah, that's how we each sort of got introduced. So yeah, moving forward, what exactly is it about Brandon Sanderson's work that grabbed you, that said, hey, this is cool? This, was there a moment in the books where you're just like, okay, I like this guy, I want to read more? Or like you mentioned, Amy said you liked Vin and the sort of feisty characters.
Yeah, I've written some fan fiction, and I've written like a novel or two that probably will never get published, and they seem to be kind of characters that are familiar, like this almost like underdog women who are usually of stature. So not that Serene fits that in, but
right, she's super tall, isn't she? She's
super tall, yeah. And I was like, that's not a problem I can relate to, but I can understand in a sense, because I had a friend in junior high and high school who was pretty tall, and so she always hated that.
Yeah. For me, I just remember, again, when I was reading Elantris, it was the very first time I sort of experienced the Brandon Avalanche. And
100 pages of bliss and terror all in one.
Where you're just reading, and then suddenly everything is happening, and you don't know how to stop.
Everything is happening at all times and in all places, and at least 2 characters will die.
Yeah, I'm reading Oathbringer, his most recent book, and I'm about here, and I'm like about to hit the avalanche or like creeping into it, and I'm like, I've got to find a big chunk of time where I can just do it.
Well, I remember
I'm not going to want to stop.
So I started reading The Wheel of Time, decades ago now, back when I was like 14 or 15. Wow, that is plural decades. I feel old.
You are
but
old.
I remember
okay.
Stop it. So I was reading it, and I remember I'd sort of given up on the series because after a while I just lost track of everything that was happening, and Brandon picked it up. And I realized that Brandon was picking it up at the time that the avalanche should happen in this series as a whole. And so the 3 books that Brandon wrote were the Brandon Avalanche of the Wheel of Time. And then the last book in that series was the Brandon Avalanche of the Brandon Avalanche of the Wheel of Time. And then there was one chapter I got to. The chapter was over 100 pages long. It was like 150 pages. And I was just like, oh my goodness, we're like going fractal. This is like the avalanche of the avalanche of the avalanche, and it was just absolutely nuts, but it was glorious. And so, oh man,
I still haven't read Wheel of Time. I'm too scared to do it.
That is
it's
a very
an investment. The last time I read the books for a while, but the last time I went through it, when I decided to pick up and go through Brandon's, I decided to do the audiobooks. And
I may have to do that.
Starting at the beginning of the audiobooks and going into the last book of the series took me about a year. Because it's that kind of an investment. And
They're thick books.
Yeah, we own them. My husband has read all of them, but he has an hour train ride to and from work most days, and so he can do that. Whereas I'm like, if I read too much at the wrong time, then things get broken.
Then your children starve.
Yeah, or they're crawling on me going, feed me!
The solution is to get them to read much earlier, get them sucked into the books, and then they never get in trouble.
I'm not sure that the Wheel of Time is child appropriate, nor even Brandon's books.
It's the option is that or Magic the Gathering. Which drug would you rather them be on? Let's just face it.
They're doomed to be nerds. It's gonna happen.
Yeah, it is. I think for me, the moment that probably hooked me and then just said, all right, this guy knows what he's doing. But I really enjoyed Mistborn was going forward and seeing how all the various pieces worked together. But once, and this is minor spoilers, once Kelsier actually fights the Steel Inquisitor,
and the second time, not the one that's actually like on screen.
Yeah, the one we actually see. Because it's, first of all, there's a general principle in writing in that there's nothing less sudden than the word suddenly.
You want to try not to use lees on any words.
Yeah, well, and it's just more the fact that every word you use extends out a scene. This causes a problem with action because you want to write about this incredibly detailed and skillful thing that they do, but by explaining how skillful they are, it slows down mentally the fight, and it bogs it down.
And you want to show, not tell.
Exactly.
You want to be like, they're so awesome. You want to just, boom, they did it.
But you can't just say, they're awesome. That has no punch. And so...
Awesomeness.
Yeah. This is a happy day.
We'll talk about that later.
And we have way too many books to get to before that.
That's true.
No, but and so that scene starts, and the fight is so very well done. I can picture it in my mind, and in detail, not just me filling in the gaps. Like, he explains what's going on, and you see what two expert Mistborn can do in a fight versus one another.
His writing is very cinematic.
Yes, and it was the first time I'd ever read something where I truly felt like, holy cow, this could work. Like, and I can see this happening. And if we can ever get some sort of Mistborn series or anime or movie, that scene, like, the entire film for me will hinge on that scene. Like, if they can't do that scene, it's a failure. Because how can you fail that scene? Brandon wrote it brilliantly. It's right there. You just have to do a shot-for-shot remake.
Good.
And so it's just one of those things where, as I'm reading that, I'm like, okay, this guy knows a thing or two about writing and writing action, and I didn't think that was a thing you could really, truly do.
Mm-hmm. The thing that's cool about Brandon, though, is he's willing to put in his paces. Like, I was listening to an audiobook about entrepreneurship a while ago, and the guy in the book used the term doing your reps, where, when you're exercising, it's not just a matter of, I exercised and now I'm strong. It's a process, and you have to be willing to do it and not be strong for a while. And for Brandon, I think Elantris was the 7th book he wrote.
I think that's right. I think 7.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And, the fact that he just kept writing and writing and writing and finally got Elantris published, that's just cool to me.
To me, do we know, because I know he said he used to work at the front desk of a hotel at super late at night so that he could life
did the
hack.
Graveyard shift, yeah.
Yeah, so he could life hack his insomnia. And do we know what hotel that was? Like, frankly, that should be
I think I do, but I'm not entirely positive, so okay. I don't want to say yet.
We need to find...
I have a friend who was friends with his friends at the time he was working there, so they actually dropped in on him a couple times.
Yeah, well, so first of all, we need to find that front desk, and it needs to be memorialized, because it's like... There's at least 7 books that got written there, basically.
We'll make a plaque.
Well, so that whole... I know J.K. Rowling, when she wrote the 7th book, she, locked herself into a hotel room, and when she left, she, put a sign up in there that said, "I finished it here," and later on they like put a plaque in that
They like
room.
framed it or something.
I know
That's kind of cool.
There's a cafe or something where she wrote most of the books, and they do Harry Potter stuff.
And
there.
so,
They're
of
course
like,
they do.
well, might as well.
So I want this. So
you
basically, I want this.
capitalize on that.
I want this hotel desk to be memorialized like that.
Just a little plaque, it'll be great.
But I don't know. But yeah, he definitely did his reps, and like just to love writing so much that you can write 7 books before you ever get published. I don't understand that level of.
Beyond that, I mean, the thing about Brandon takes breaks from writing by writing something else.
Yeah,
I'm writing a
yeah. He
different-
goes on a vacation, and we get the Emperor's Soul in Legion.
And the Alcatraz books, and he just goes. He's like, "Hey, I want to write this idea down." So Legion was written on an airplane, wasn't it?
I think so, yeah.
I think it
remember.
was.
That.
And so it's just
That's crazy.
it boggles my mind. Do y'all remember during the what is it, what was it called, for the ice bucket challenge? Is it ALS or
ALS,
ASL?
yeah. My grandpa
ALS.
had that.
He did an ice bucket challenge, but what he was doing is he was writing, and somebody snuck up behind him and pours a bucket of ice over him, and he doesn't flinch. He just keeps writing it and writing, and then it was probably Peter, I don't know, pops up and just says, test 1 complete, Sanderbot number 374 is waterproof, and it's just like basically the premise that it's not Brandon, it's just this series of robots that are constantly churning out content, because the man is prolific.
Patrick Rothfuss has complained that Brandon Sanderson makes everyone
he's
else
making him look bad.
Yeah,
Like,
makes
stop it, I
everyone
can't
else
keep
look
up.
bad.
Yeah.
Oh, and I love it. But
yeah.
I love the idea of, I want to take a break from writing this, so I'll write something different. And of course, that something different turns into something we love.
Yeah.
And so
he doesn't just sit down and read someone else's book on vacation. Like, that's what I did on vacation. I read his book. His vacation was, let's compound this.
Oh, compounded. That's a reference.
Yeah, see what I did there? I'm so glad you noticed that.
Of course, I pick up what you put down.
But like what you're talking about, the reps and stuff, it definitely shows in his work, and I guess it sort of segues to the next topic. We're just like the quirks of Brandon's writing and his style that we like, and so. But I actually like one of the things that I loved, because it builds each world, and is the swearing that he does in the book. Well,
the fake swears.
Yeah, which I didn't know until last night, actually, as Bill and I were talking about it, that's something Robert Jordan did as well, of which Brandon was obviously a huge fan of his work. But the build-up of the swearing makes perfect sense, because just that thought process of what do people hold most dear is also going to be what's the most profane. And so, by picking your swear words correctly, what your epithet, I can't ever say the word correct. Epithet. Okay, Boba Fett, and he.
Boba Fett.
Yeah.
Epithet. Where?
Merciful Tomai, right there. Anyway, but just things like that, where it keeps it grounded that he's thought this through. He's thought about that. They wouldn't just say our swear words, because that doesn't make sense. Because if you go to Spain, what's a swear word there is very different than a swear word in Mexico. Things that are okay to say here aren't okay to say in England, but it's okay to say in Canada. But then everything's fine in Australia.
Yeah.
Or South Africa. Yeah, I have a friend from South Africa, and it's really. Funny
Ireland has 2 different versions of the F word.
It's a nice bit of world building. It's one of those things where they talk about him writing excuses where if you're really, really detailed in one area, you can get away with more in another area that you don't explain.
Yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
No. And the other part of it is just like because Brandon plans his books out so deeply that these little details that he throws in that it convinces you that the entire world is round. It reminds me of, boy, this is going to be a weird comparison. I remember one time, I can't remember what game it was. I think it was World of Warcraft, actually. One of the World of Warcrafts, they have the login screen, and it has, standard fantasy of big giant dragon, lording over the castle type thing.
Oh, that was Cataclysm.
Yes, it was Cataclysm. And so they, in one of the developer meetings, they showed that it's like, this is the login screen. And now this is the login screen if you rotate 30 degrees this way. And you suddenly see that it is framed perfectly so that everything looks great. But as soon as you turn it 30 degrees, there is no dragon from the back down. There's no city behind the castle.
So they drew exactly what they needed to.
Yeah, and because Brandon keeps putting small details, you're convinced that if I rotate 30 degrees this way, it's all still going to be there. And judging by the words of Brandon that we have, it is all still there. I think we have to go a full 90-degree turn before we start seeing blank spots with Brandon. But
probably
it's just he fills in the details so well with small things that convince you that he knows everything.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I don't remember if it was just from him or if it's been other authors too that I've read, their writing advice for world building. And one thing is you have to sit there and think about mundane stuff like, what do you do if there's a natural disaster? What did common people do? What do you do with the waste? What do you do with, how does the sewer work? You have to know that as the author, even though the reader's probably never going to find out about it. But if you know that in the back of your head, the background characters and everything else are going to flow the way they need to make it seamless.
Well, and that, to your point, what do they do with the waste? Because Brandon has his rules of magic and stuff that he does.
The Sandersonian Law. First Sandersonian Law.
I can't remember all of them, but one of them...
You have to have weaknesses.
It has to have weaknesses, but there's the Zeroth Law that Howard sort of put in, Howard Taylor, his friend, as sort of the basis where he says... just this very simple rule, but it's very true in fantasy, and it's a huge problem, where he says, it's like, if your magic makes it cheaper to transport goods by magic than donkey, then you've ruined your feudal economy. Start over. Something to that effect. And Brandon, he thinks about his magic, and he thinks about the smaller things, like, how does this affect the farmers? How does this affect the commerce? How does this affect how governments are run?
Candle makers? Because if you can do a spell to make light, then why do you have candles?
Well, and to the point that, like you say,
it's sort of like in Avatar: The Last Airbender. That was one of the things that I loved, is what they did with, was it Ba Sing Se, or was it
with the trains?
With the earthbenders? Yeah,
that's Ba Sing Se.
Yeah, and it was just the trains. I was thinking not the Omashu. The one where they have the slides, and then the earthbenders move the stuff up to the top.
That's the first season, I think.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And so it's just the same sort of thing where it's just
you
have to look at how does this affect the rest of the world.
Well, and
did you guys ever watch the second series with Cora? Because that's a big thing in the first season of that with the Equalists too. Because it's the benders get to do that, but the non-benders, they're just getting the short end of the stick there because they can't do bending.
Yeah, right. But it makes sense because suddenly you have free energy, and free energy is going to be used, and he does that in his story, and it's interesting because very similar to people in chat are talking about the spice in Dune, but it makes sense if you think about it, like things like the money system in the Stormlight Archive is also the fuel for the magic.
Love it.
And it makes perfect sense why that would be the case, because there's an inherent value to this thing.
Well, and it's not just that, though. It's also their standard source of light.
Yeah.
The whole concept with Kaladin's father having this giant globe filled with spheres because, as a surgeon, he needs steady light that he can work by. Such a cool concept, because and just the fact that when the storms come through, it makes these gems glow. Well, what does that mean? That means that there's a steady source of light, and it just goes from there, and it builds. And it's one of those things. Like, I would have loved to be there for this world building session.
Yeah.
Which probably wasn't that interesting. It's probably him sitting here thinking, okay, and just
And it was probably spread across 7 different books, and then he cannibalizes it for the one.
Which, yeah, that's another thing that he does. I'm still looking forward to when he eventually does release Aether of Night, because it's going to be completely different than the version that I read, because he said he's cannibalized several different things for it, and so...
Well, so we sort of went off on what quirk I liked. What about you, Amy?
I really, really like banter and his dialogue. There are many times I sit there reading the book and I just bust out laughing. And I think I've never caught them looking at me going, what is Mom doing? But I think they're just used to it, the fact that I will just sit there and giggle to myself.
The
and,
Kelsier's crew meetings are...
Kelsier's crew is probably my favorite.
In Stormlight, I love Kaladin and Shallan and Adolin. There was a scene in Oathbringer between Adolin and but Adolin and Shallan, when there's one time where anyway, it's a semi-spoiler. He goes into a room and she doesn't realize it's him. I loved that scene. She's like, what are you doing?
I've forgotten which one that is. There's a few of them, yeah.
Spoiler, do you want me to...
Well, this episode is a general one. I think we're safe.
Okay, so anyway, but like he goes into a room and she thinks it's just her serving lady, and she's in her pajamas and she's like in her bed, which is a blanket on the floor, and he walks in and she's like, "What are you doing? You're not supposed to be in here."
Yeah, no, that's.
And I think her safe hand, and everyone else. I mean, she's mortified, and I'm like. That has never actually happened to me, but I can totally feel that right there.
And then Pattern sitting there chaperoning in the corner, telling them, no mating.
No mating.
I found a drawing that somebody did that I need to
link to.
It's hilarious.
We'll put that in the 6-7.
I'll have to find that, yeah. I'll see if I can find it.
All right, so... For me, I'm honestly not sure what my favorite quirks. I just love the magic systems. I love
last night you were talking about the avalanche as your.
Well, I mentioned the avalanche. We already talked about the avalanche, but that and just the magic systems. The fact that he comes up with magic systems based on such odd things. I mean, who thinks to themselves, what if our characters swallowed bits of metal and metabolized those, and that makes magic? The metal is their magic juice. I mean,
that starts to sound like a very
metals. That'd be great, Just chug them down.
Like the inspiration he gets for some of these systems is amazing. Like I remember the one that always stuck with me was after Emperor's Soul, where he talks about how he went on a trip to, I think it was China, where he talked about...
the chops, where he saw the stamps, yes.
Yeah, and he saw that people would put stamps on works that they liked. Mm-hmm. And he's like, that's, how strange that is. And he started, riffing off that concept. And that's what he does, is I don't know how he came up with allomancy or Farukami.
The names of his magic systems, too.
Yeah, it's true. But the Mistborn ones are the ones I don't know the source of those.
I know Farukami was, I think it had to do with him pulling all-nighters, and he just said, I wish I could store up sleep. And then later on, use the sleep that I'm not using right now so I'm not exhausted. I think that was the origin of Farukami.
I would love that ability so much.
Uh-huh. And I think that it shows up in Wakefulness.
Yeah, I think that's bronze?
I can't remember.
I think it's ferrochemical bronze. But anyway, it's not important.
I think you're right.
But he doesn't just think about the magic system. Because it'd be one thing if he just wrote the magic system. He thinks about how these magic systems interact, which leads to the amazing stuff in Mistborn, where we have the magic systems all in one, and then he's also concurrently thinking about how all these magic systems interact with one another, as evidenced by whenever you go into these interviews, people asking what would happen if so and so pushed on Nightblood,
Gosh, yes.
And he's like, he stops and he thinks, he's like, no, it wouldn't, it'd take a lot to push on Nightblood. Because Nightblood has a lot of investiture. And you're just like, really? You just that fast, huh? So you've actually thought this through? This isn't you just talking out your butt, huh?
Part of me wonders, how many of these things, he says it and he's like, well, I guess I gotta stick with that now.
Mental note made.
But I actually, because he said he's actually a very forgetful person. And
well, I mean, he himself mispronounces his characters' names. He said.
Don't get me started on that.
I feel better about being like, I don't know how to say that name.
No, so this will come up in Mistborn, but the names are very French looking, and so
for certain regions.
So the central dominants they're very French looking. So you have and he is so the name
like
Kelsey.
I speak Japanese, so I'm over in this.
So Kelsier's name apparently should, because it's French, should be Kelsier. It's Demu because that's French.
Saying it wrong.
Well, no. So this is where it gets weird. This is where it gets weird because it's because we all say Kelsier, but it should be Kelsier. So someone asked him, like, how do you say it, Brandon? He's like, well, someone from the central dominance would say Kelsier or would say Kelsier.
Kelsier.
And he's like, and they'd say va instead of vin, or I don't got the accent quite. And he's like, but I say Kelsier. Which I'm like, wait, God is mispronouncing the names of his characters. I don't understand what that means. Like, you're supposed to be able,
You created these names. You named them. It's like if my mom called me, Bilile,
Bilile. That's terrible.
Which but you know what I mean? It's like you created this name. How come you're saying it wrong?
Yeah, it doesn't make sense to me.
I think I heard him refer to Sazed as Sazed one time, and that that one sort of made my skin crawl.
Yeah, that one. His name is.
It's like Sazed, Sazed. I understand, but making that one syllable.
And then there's the problem of they all call him Saze for short all the time in the book, and so you're just like, this doesn't.
Well, and I always said, Saz.
Sazed.
But I'd say Saz for short.
My brain just didn't put a sound to it. It's like, it's just the letters.
It's this
we
word.
Just go with the letters. Yeah. We go with it.
It's like when Delaware thinks of his wife's name. Just
my name
just a rushing
is Keeper Saz.
Oh gosh.
But yeah.
Oh no, my brother just saw me pronounce it Billila, and now
you put it on the internet. You're doomed.
Yeah, but he's gonna push it to the rest of the family. Anyway.
Life is about pushes and pulls, Bill.
So there was one topic I wanted to go into. Brandon sightings in the wild. I
talked to him twice, I think.
Because that's the thing. We live close to him, and we went to the same university as him, and so we actually have run into him a few different times and interacted in a few different ways. So what are some of the times that you've actually had a chance to see him? Do you have any fun stories about
I have
when you
one.
actually did get to talk to him?
So it was when we were at BYU, and I think I was newly married, and I have my maiden name starts with M. My name now starts with A, and is very similar to another name that's big. It's a famous name. Anyway, and so I was like, and he talked about, author advice and writing advice. And I went up and I had a chance to talk to him. And I was like, so this is my name. Should I use a pseudonym? And he's like, you probably should. Maybe you could probably use your maiden name. And I was like, yeah. And I told him, he's like, yeah, that'd probably work well.
Yeah.
So it's my whole big experience right there.
And so now he knows.
If he remembers me.
It's a famous name, so.
Yeah, maybe.
We all know he secretly has a copper mind, so. No, you go first, Bill.
That's why he's forgetful. Okay, so my story, I've run into him a few times actually, but the one that stands out the most to me is when I was at BYU. All three of us, the way we know each other is we were part of this club, which we essentially referred to as the Nerd Club, because it was a science fiction fantasy club, and it started to adopt video games and anime and all other sorts of different nerdery. And we found out that Brandon was a former president of this club. Long story behind that we won't get into, but he had part of it. And so we were actually able to get him to come and do a sort of Q&A for...
I think that might have been where I talked to him.
I think it was.
Probably was.
For the members of this club. And so, stepping back a little bit, one of the things that Brandon did, especially a little while ago, is he would post some of his works in progress on his website. That he did that for the entirety of Warbreaker, but the book The Arithmetist, he actually had posted the first, I think, 5 chapters. It was under the name Scribbler at the time, and I remember reading it, and this Q&A, and I loved the book, and this Q&A just happened to be about a month after Brandon was tapped to finish The Wheel of Time for Robert Jordan. And as soon as I heard that was happening, I was excited because I remember thinking, okay, I want to read the rest of this and finish it off. But then I stopped and I thought, oh no, he hasn't finished Scribbler. What does this mean? And so during the Q&A, I raised my hand and I said, okay, so Scribbler, I know that you've finished the draft, but it's not published yet. What does this new tasking for the Wheel of Time mean for Scribbler? And he just said, actually, it probably means that it's not going to get published until the Wheel of Time is completely finished. And I know that he just looked at my face just fall, and he just thought, I have just broken this poor college kid's heart. And he said, all right, I'll tell you what.
And that's when Bill's drinking problems started.
Hey, this is Mountain Dew, okay? No, but he said, all right, I'll tell you what. If you send me an email through my website, I will get back to you and I will send you a draft copy of Scribbler. And suddenly, life was wonderful, life was good. And then I read Scribbler, and I loved it. It was my absolute favorite thing that Brandon had written.
And I'm still convinced it's in the Cosmere.
And I got to the end of it, and that was the first I realized that it was not a standalone. And so I realized I don't only have to wait for the next book. I have to wait for this book to be published. And then I have to wait for him to write the next book. And then I have to wait for that one to be published.
But before you wait for all of those... Before you have all those, you have to wait for him to finish The Wheel of Time.
And I'm still waiting for him to finish the second book in the Scribbler series. So the first book was The Arithmetist. I'm waiting for the Aztlanian, and I'm still waiting, and it's driving me crazy.
Is it on his list of books that he's working on, or in his schedule?
I think it's supposed to come out either this year or next.
Okay, I couldn't remember which.
So hopefully soon I will finally be able to finish this odyssey of the Scribbler Odyssey. And finally find out, okay, what the heck happens at the end of this story?
For me, I've only...
especially because the first book ends on such a huge cliffhanger.
Oh, so many problems.
So...
the only time... So I saw him at the same event you two did. So my background, I was president of this club for about 2 years.
And you hadn't read the books yet.
I didn't know who this guy was. At all. All I knew was that a couple people in the club were like, hey, we could do a Q&A with Brandon Sanderson. I have a contact with him. For those who are familiar, I think it was One Lower Light who actually had the contact.
I think so. That sounds right.
A friend of ours. And he, and I'm like, oh, so is this guy like is he a thing? And I'm being told, like,
Brandon Sanderson.
Yeah. And they're just like, yeah, he's a big deal. He's been tapped to finish the Wheel of Time, which I knew of the Wheel of Time. I knew it got angsty about book 4 from an old friend, and I knew that the number of books in the series was in double digits, and that these things were Chihuahua killers. You drop it, the dog's gonna die. And so I'm, okay, that sounds like, okay, sure, yeah, have this, sure, organize it, and I'll make sure to get you guys the rooms and stuff. Just give me the date, and I'll figure it out. And so we did that, and it all got organized, and I showed up for the first, 10 minutes, and people are asking him in-depth Mistborn, what I know now to be in-depth Mistborn questions. I don't remember what they were. And I'm just sitting here, I'm like, okay, well, I can see that they're passionate about this. This guy probably is a decent writer or something. I don't know. And then I left after 15 minutes, and because I'm just
Mistborn.
Yeah,
and what?
I'm completely lost, and I'm just like, yeah, he looks like a writer. Mm-hmm. He looks very good at looking like a writer.
Yes, he did.
And that's all I had to go on. And then in my Mistborn coma, I went into one Christmas, which I think was about 2 years after this event happened. I'm like, I was in the same freaking room as him. I have so many questions. I can't go back in time.
You could have asked.
I had the opportunity. Did nothing. Not a single thing. Nothing.
Yep. I think the first time I actually met him...
That's when my drinking problem started.
Yeah. No, I think the first time I actually met him was at the shipping party for Howard Taylor's first book. Which was over at Dragon's
I know you meant, like, mailing it out, but...
Yeah.
I hear shipping party, and...
No, we're not trying to get his book to date Brandon's books. So... Because that's just awkward in so many different ways.
Okay, so if we invested a book, could they date?
I don't even want
to know.
Okay, moving on.
Married, okay.
So, both of them are. So
I'm a book.
All right. So one of the other things I want to talk about in this episode is we keep using the word Kazmir. That if you look in the dictionary, Kazmir is not a word in the English language. So we kind of want to give do sort of a primer for what the Kazmir is. There's a few different terms we're going to use, almost our own sort of Ars Arcanum for Brandon's books. So first off, Jordan, you want to start us talking about what Kazmir means? Like what exactly is?
Cosmere's Brandon's main continuity universe, and when I say universe, I literally mean a universe. It's a world, and it operates under the laws of what he calls realmatic theory.
Yeah. So certain a lot of authors, what Brandon has done, he had an overarching huge story that he wanted to tell, but he decided that you can't really just jump in and do that, and so he decided he's going to write a bunch of smaller stories. Just a few enormous epics that are thousands of pages long for the smaller stories, and then he's going to tie them together, and they're all part of one enormous overarching story. First off, I think the concept of doing this is kind of gutsy, because when you decide you're going to write a series that essentially lasts dozens of books, that's quite an undertaking. And first off, not only are you saying, I can write this much, you're also saying others are going to want to read this much. And so what he did, which is
when did we find
brilliant
out? When was Elantris written?
Elantris was written, I
or
want to say,
published.
2006, right?
06, I think is right.
Okay, so we're 11, 12 years in,
12.
And he still has, at minimum, 7 Stormlight books to go.
7 Stormlight books, not to mention he's got 2 more Mistborn trilogies to finish. Well, he has to finish this.
He has one more book, and then he has the next series, right?
He has 2 more eras, what he's calling them. Each of them is a trilogy. One, he said he's going to be like an 80s level, 1980s level technological level in the Mistborn universe, and then he's going to have a science fiction one, which apparently is going to feature Hoid very intensely, and it's going to be toward like sort of the culmination of the Kazmir.
I didn't know about the 80s one.
Yeah. So, like he for a while he referred to it as the modern Mistborn, and then he said no, that's actually going to be more of an 80s level technology. So I'm thinking that we're going to have a crossover with Stranger Things, and but no. So I've lost my train of thought. Where was I?
It's how you're talking about how big it is, and so
yeah. So the Kazmir is this overarching world that ties not all of his work, but most of his work together. He has a few series that aren't part of the Cosmere that he said, including like the Alcatraz books
and the Reckoners.
The Reckoners.
If they happen on Earth, they aren't.
Yeah,
Cosmere.
Essentially, if it's on Earth, it's not part of the Cosmere. That's actually a pretty good rule.
That said, I still feel like Arithmetist has to be in the Cosmere. It fits too well.
But the thing is, he's decided to cross over into so many different types of media now. Like he's got novels, he's got short stories, he's got novellas, he's got a graphic novel. Which White Sand, he wrote that as an actual novel. Never published it. That's another one that you could get. There's a way to access it. I think you have to get that one through the 17th Shard now.
Maybe, yeah.
I think you have to email his website, actually.
One of them you email. So Aether of Night and White Sands are the two that you can get that he hasn't published. One of them you have to email his website. The other one you have to go through. I believe it's the 17th Shard. He's given them a specific, exclusivity for that one.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, it's basically, yeah. Johnny says in the chat, he says it's like the Marvel universe, which is essentially it's a huge multiverse.
Yeah.
I'll get into Doctor Strange and why I think they should be the ones to make Brandon's movie later, but so yeah,
it's huge, and each of these worlds has a different magic system on it. How these magics interact with other magics are things he's considering, and that ties to the whole thing of shards.
Yeah, so we're looking at the Kazmir. Essentially, the Kazmir has what I'm going to call an origin story, where there was a being called Adonalsium. This being was essentially the god of this universe, just the omnipotent being of this universe. And there were, I believe, 16, there was a group of people together, and they shattered Adonalsium somehow, we don't know how, into 16 pieces, and 16 different people picked up those, what they call shards, and became vessels.
Aspects of divinity.
Aspects of divinity, exactly. And they scattered to the far reaches of the universe, and each of them, essentially, a lot of them gathered around different planets. They promised that they weren't going to interact with each other, but a few of them, of course, broke that promise, which is how we get multiple magic systems on one world, like in Scadrial, which is the world of Mistborn.
And Roshar as well.
And Roshar as well. And so all of these vessels have scattered, and now they're powering magic.
Well, and the important thing about a shard is each one of them, it's a piece of divinity, a specific piece, like almost a virtue of divinity. With
a virtue or an aspect, I think, or a personality trait almost.
Yeah.
Or a physical trait.
And it warps the person who grabbed it. And so ones that we've seen a bunch of them, and that aspect changes how they view things, and you almost like some of them feel like good versus evil. You almost shouldn't look at it like that, because they're more a force. It's like saying a hurricane is evil. A hurricane's not evil. A hurricane is, right. And it's just one of these things. And so you think of them as these horrible things of, and so playing with mortals, but they're just there in it, and what their power is and how they view things shape what the magic system is.
Yeah, so you have different aspects of Adonalsium that these vessels have taken up. So you have a few of them. We don't know all of them yet, but a few of them. You have ruin and preservation. You have autonomy. You have cultivation. You have dominion. You have devotion.
Honor.
And all of these are different aspects of the same enormous being that have been taken up by mortals who, because of the power of them, essentially are not twisted, but overwhelmed to the point where it consumes their every thought, and they become just their image of what that aspect is. So, for example, Ruin takes on a creature, or a human named Ati, and it talks about in some of the external stuff that we have studied about Brandon, how he was a normal human once, but then over time he became consumed by this aspect of Ruin, and he followed it through and essentially was led to work out its purposes as much as he possibly could. And so Okay, so now in addition to these 16 people, there was also another individual who keeps popping up just subtly. He's probably my favorite character of Brandon's, and his name is Hoid. Now, what do we know about Hoid?
He's a fly in the ointment, that's for sure.
He's really fun to read.
So the very first time he showed up in Brandon's books was in Elantris. It's a blink and you'll miss it.
It's a really short thing. Like
I remember
rereading it, I was like, "There he is! I saw him this time." Like I did.
Did they say his name in that book?
In the first book, they just say Hoid.
Okay.
And he's just a beggar who's helping Serene distribute the goods to the Elantrians, I believe.
Yeah.
And I didn't even think anything of it. I think, oh, this is just some random name, some
random guy,
fly-by-night character, whatever. And then after I finished, I think it was Hero of Ages. That's when I started diving down the rabbit hole and looking up, and suddenly I'm seeing all these people asking questions like, what about Hoid? Why was Hoid here? And I was like, wait, who is Hoid? What? I'd forgotten the guy's name.
You don't remember Random Beggar from page 237 of...
Out of how many character names?
Like, that's the guy, like, if I were ever in a movie, that's probably the guy I would play, is like Random Beggar number 3. But that's who Hoid plays. He just shows up, and he's sort of a little puppet master. He's not doing huge things. He's just nudging people just enough to make different things happen.
And we don't know his goals.
We don't know his goals. We know that he was there at the shattering of Adenalcia.
But we don't know why. We don't know...
Mm-hmm. We know that he goes by several different names.
It's implied he had the chance to take up one of the shards, but turned it down.
He turned it down.
But we don't know if it's true. It's just sort of implied that that's true.
Mm-hmm. And he has different relationships with different shards. But the other thing is, he's been around for a long time. Thousands of years. Several lifetimes.
Well, and the thing that is interesting, because I didn't know about Hoid at all. And because I didn't read the books in order. I read Mistborn first. And so I had never seen the name Hoid. And so after reading the books, Bill asked me, and it's like, so, did you catch Hoid? And I'm just like,
what's a Hoid?
That sounds like what you do when you dry heave. Hoid! Like, it's just, what is a Hoid? That name is weird. I don't like it. I like Saphandrius way better. But, no, so he... I
like Wit.
Yeah, and so I'm sitting there, I don't know, and he's like, oh, you don't know. And... yes, and he's like, this guy appears in all his books. And I'm sitting here, I'm like, well, but you said they're on other planets, Bill. Like, this was a promise you made to me.
Hoid is a world jumper.
Yeah, and you're just like, yes, but he shows up. And I'm like, how? And at this point, like, Way of Kings is the most recent book out. And you're just sort of like, it's really not clear. And we don't know how he's doing this. We're now starting to get inklings of how he's doing this. And
so in addition to the Kazmir books, the main books, so you've got all the huge novels, you've got the novellas like The Emperor's Soul and stuff like that. But in addition to that, there are little tidbits that he's given at different places he's gone. At readings, at book signings, in Ask Me Anythings on Reddit. Every so often he'll give a little tidbit and suddenly everybody just descends. He says something that nobody's heard before and everybody descends and starts picking it apart. Well, so in the Way of Kings or Words of Radiance, there was a chapter heading that was written entirely in code. And people worked together to decode this, and they finally figured out it was just a sequence of numbers, and they were able to figure out this code that he translated into. And he's he's just sitting here watching the internet, just sort of giggling, waiting for people to start figuring stuff out.
Yeah, so I want to point out that sequence is really dry in the audiobook.
Oh, I believe it.
10023. Like, the guy reads the whole thing. And I'm sitting here. I hit 15 seconds ahead. No, he's still going. 15 seconds ahead.
I hadn't even thought about the audiobook for that.
He's still going. I went 3 minutes of this guy just saying numbers. At which point I'm like, did Brandon have a stroke? What's going on here?
Well, see, and I'm reading the book, and I'm just like, oh, I'll skip this page.
Yeah.
Yeah, whereas I'm like, get back to the characters. I want to read that stuff.
Yeah.
No, it's about the numbers. Anyway, no.
I'm not a math person. I'm a word person.
Yeah, but I do love code breaking. I didn't do that. I wasn't part of that, but I love that. But so if you ever read stuff online and you see because a lot of times people, they obviously don't type out full titles of things. Mm-hmm. And so you'll see that if you're trying to find a book that matches, it'll never match unless Brandon does something really mean. WOB, Word of Brandon.
Word of Brandon,
and
yes.
So there's an entire resource of fans, and I don't know exactly who's organizing all this.
Are you talking about the 17th Shard?
Yeah.
The Coppermind?
Yeah, but I don't know how they do all this stuff. Like, they record it. You can actually get the sound files.
I think it started as just a fan group, and then Brandon sort of legitimized it. And then the Coppermind is the wiki that the same group put together.
Yeah, and it's thorough, which how much is in these things, and you wanna lose sleep. Read Brandon's books and then say, man, there's almost an entire 2 books of Words of Brandon are sitting around here.
When I finished The Hero of Ages, that's when I first found the Coppermind and the 17th Shard. And I started reading through, and I remember I finished that book at like 3 a.m. in the first place. And then I spent another 2 hours reading fan theories and forum discussions and all of this stuff that had been gathered together. And this is when, The Hero of Ages was the most recent book. There were 4 books out. Essentially, there were 2 stories out. There was Elantris and there was Mistborn. And I just remember there was so much to dig through then. And so that's another one of the reasons we decided to do that, because there's so much to talk about.
We could seriously do an entire book every single day, and we would still have plenty to do at the end of the month.
Yeah.
Just in speculation.
Goodness.
And so that's the other thing I love about Brandon's books. It inspires a level of interactivity in the fandom that I only see in things like the Gravity Falls fandom, for example, in cartoons, started obsessing over trying to find all these little hints because they're there. He puts them in there, and they're meant for you to find them. And
Brandon works the same way.
There's the Psych TV show, which I've only seen a little bit of, but apparently there's a pineapple in like every episode. And big fans at the Comic-Con that I go to, there's a bunch of people who are really big fans of Psych. And so they all made sure, and like I think they had like 2 of the main actors come. And so a bunch of people brought pineapples to take pictures with them. And so like pineapple's a thing in Psych. Anyway.
And so that's one of the things though, but I like, for example, I love a lot of different fandoms. Brandon's the only one that has the following that I've seen that is so thorough and passionate and trying to figure out how this puzzle fits together, because it's not just reading a book. It's not just a good book. It's that he puts codes in his book. He tries to put these things specifically. You can enjoy the book on the surface level. You can enjoy the book the next level down. And then you find out, like, it's just an onion. There's just more layers. You keep peeling it back. You think you're going to find a center. It's not there. There is no center. It's just more onion. And it's amazing that as dedicated as the fan base is, and it's why we're using it as our phrase, there is truly always another secret.
Ogres have layers. Brandon has layers.
Brandon is not an ogre.
No, Brandon's not an ogre.
Oh, we crossed the
All
names.
right. Well, we should probably start wrapping up. But before that, we want to thank our patrons. The Sandersonian Institute of Kazmir Studies is supported entirely by our patrons over on patreon.com/Kazmir Studies. And this week we want to thank our first patrons, Johnny G and Michael S. When you become a patron, you really help out the show in addition to getting access to bonus content like the 6-7, which is a collection of 7 different pieces of content we find each week that we enjoy and want to share. You also get early access to any bonus shows we produce, automatic entry into any giveaways we have, and more. And it also really helps to build the community behind the Sandersonian Institute of Kazmir Studies. Now moving forward, also, each of us, in addition to being part of the Sandersonian Institute, we have our own personal projects that we like to work on. Amy, when you're not here chatting about Brandon Sanderson with us, what are you doing, and where can we find your work?
I'm a cosplayer in training, I guess. I don't know. I'm not the big time by any sense, but I've been doing cosplay for a couple of years now, here and there, and I like to make random stuff. We've got a 3D printer, so I 3D print sometimes, and I do some sewing, and I do some foam work with EVA foam, and I also do stuff with Warbla, and I have
what
costumes done. Warbla?
What?
It's a thermoplastic.
That's not a thing.
It is a thing.
No, I think, isn't that one of Shalon's underlings in Oathbringer?
Yeah,
I think Orbla's one of them.
Warbla.
Anyway.
Or maybe it's a country on Roshar's. I don't know.
Wasn't that where they have the water that they just walk around and everyone has trench foot?
I'm going to throw this rag button. Anyway, I have a dog. That's why I'm doing that. Anyway, so I am on Instagram. I am on Facebook. I am on Twitter. And Vero, I don't know how to say it, is another thing. Anyway, but if you look for Coincidence Cosplay, and on Twitter, it's Coincidence Cosp, because it's too long.
If you're watching the stream, it's right above her head.
It's in my thingy, which is up there, I guess. So that's how you can find me. And I usually respond. I should be able to respond within the day. Sometimes I have to go chase children. So.
All right. Awesome. And Jordan, how about you? Where can we find you when you're not?
I stream on occasion. I'm going to be starting a new XCOM series on YouTube called Tales from the Infirmary. I was hoping to have that up this week and then get back to my streaming schedule, but unfortunately real life stuff is conspiring, so that'll be starting next week. So yeah, you can either find me on Twitter at SpliceStream or on Twitch, twitch.tv/SpliceStream. A lot of my old videos are up there on Twitch. And yeah, Tales from the Infirmary starting up sometime next week.
Awesome. And when I'm not here, I'm typically writing board game reviews over at the Innkeeper's Table at www.innkeeperstable.com. You can also find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Innkeeper's Table.
Including the Mistborn game.
Yes, the very first review I wrote was actually on the game Mistborn House War. So, you should go check that out. It's posted over there at innkeeperstable.com, and love to see you there. So yeah, if you've enjoyed the show, please be sure to tell others about us and give us a 5-star review on iTunes. That'll help us to bring in new listeners and grow the Sixer community. Live episodes of the show stream on twitch.tv/innkeeperstable every 2 weeks on Monday nights at 8:30 p.m. Mountain Time, or you can also find our videos on YouTube at youtube.com/Kazmir Studies. Follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at Kazmir Studies. On behalf of Amy, Jordan, and myself, thanks for listening, and remember, there's always another secret.